Yep, I think we're live. Okay, so thank you very much once again, everybody. First of all, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Francisco. I'm gonna co-moderate this event altogether with Dr. Rabia Akhtar. Um, I work as a partnership coordinator at the Brazilian think tank Observa China, the think tank that hosts this YouTube channel. Um, and I'm honored to start this panel, China's Grand Strategy, Perspectives from the Global South, as I mentioned, as a moderator together with Dr. Rabia. So before we start, let me just make some comments here on about the event. So we're expecting to have a 2-hour event with a session of Q&As in the last 20 minutes if everything goes well. We ask participants to write down the questions in the chat, in the YouTube chat. And in case you want to direct your question to one of the panelists, one of the 4 panelists, please state it as well. The questions, the number of the questions selected, they will be restrained according to the time we have left by then. And the order of the questions will also be selected according to the relevance of the topic being discussed by them. Okay, so well, this is a very special event actually. Once it launches, it officially launches the partnership between Observa China and the Center for Strategy, Security and Policy Research, CSSPR, which is an independent think tank located at Lahore University, Pakistan. Well, as many of you already know, one of Observa China's new front of action for research and analysis are the so-called study centers or study groups. This event, it was organized under the auspices of the USA and Eurasia Geopolitics Analysis Study Center, which was established and is operating in partnership with CSSPR. The partnership initiative between Observa China and CSSPR will not only broaden the activities of both of our think tanks, as well as deepen the study um, of global South countries and its heterogeneous relationship with the giant of Asia, China. And that's all the event today is about. We're gonna present 4 different perspectives from different global South countries towards China. Well, Dr. Rabia, again, thank you very much for the partnership, for the effort, for the help. I'll pass the word to you to better present CSSPR and to give the start with our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rabia Akhtar. I'm Director, Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research, housed in University of Lahore. For those who don't know, CISPR is a leading policy think tank which is dedicated to producing cutting edge research on national and global security issues. With a focus on Pakistan's strategic interest, CISPR actively engages in policy dialogue and analyses to address contemporary challenges in geopolitics, defense, and diplomacy. We welcome you to what promises to be a thought provoking and dynamic conversation on China's grand strategy perspectives from Global South. Today's session, as Francisco has rightly said, is not just a webinar. It marks the beginning of a vital partnership between the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research and Observer China, a collaboration which reflects our shared commitment to fostering deeper understanding across regions and discipline. The global south, as you all know, often viewed through a lens shaped by Western narratives, is home to diverse and powerful perspectives that deserve to be heard and understood on their own terms. This is why we have gathered voices from Pakistan, India, Brazil, and China, nations with unique historical and strategic positions in the global order. Together, we will explore how China's grand strategy engages with these regions, seeking to understand not only how China views the global south, but how the global south views China in return. Our conversation today is very timely and essential. As the global balance of power continues to evolve, the strategies employed by states to navigate their own security, economic growth, and diplomatic relations are shifting. So, we hope to unpack the complexities of these shifts, understand what the underlying drivers of state behavior is, and highlight the cooperative opportunities that can arise from a shared vision for our future. I encourage everyone to listen with an open mind, engage with curiosity, and reflect on how these strategic narratives are shaping our world. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our distinguished panelists who will bring the perspectives of their respective countries. So, first, let me introduce the first panelist, and then I will continue to introduce as the panelists will take their order. First panelist is Paulo Filho. Paulo Filho is a defense and strategic specialist and retired colonel from the Brazilian Army. He holds a master's degree in defense and strategic studies from the National Defense University in Beijing, China, and a master's degree in military science from the Brazilian Army Staff and Command College. His extensive experience provides a unique perspective on defense strategy and geopolitical dynamics from Brazil's standpoint. We will then, after listening to Paulo, move to the Indian country perspective from Ruhi Neog, followed by Pakistan country perspective from Dr. Asif Amin, and then China's perspective towards Global South from Dr. Tong Zhao. But I will introduce them as we move towards their presentations. But first, over to you, Paulo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabia. Let's do that. Let's go. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Observa China network and the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research for launching this partnership and promoting this important event. I would also like to acknowledge my fellow panelists, besides my friend Francisco Xavier from Observa China, and again, Dr. Rabia Akhtar, who kindly invited me to participate in this session. So let's start the presentation. President Xi Jinping of China has a very clear vision of the direction he wants to lead the country under his leadership. He has articulated this vision through the concept of Chinese Dream, which represents the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. This is a nationalist vision rooted in the Republican movement that overthrew the Qing dynasty in the early 20th century, with the goal of strengthening the country and restoring its status as a great power, a true pursuit of a reclaiming lost greatness. The concept is directly related to that of grand strategy. According to Rush Doshi, grand strategy is a theory of how the state achieves its major security objectives in a way that's intentional, coordinated, and implemented through the various means at the state's disposal military, economic, and political. In other words, it is the responsibility of the government as a whole, extending beyond the specific areas or sectors. The Global Community of Shared Future document encapsulates the broad outlines of China's grand strategy, based on four initiatives: the Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative. It is essential to highlight that those initiatives increase, organize, and contextualize China's much more significant presence in the world, particularly from the perspective I will present in Latin America, with implications for the balance of power in the region, an area considered vital to U.S. security in its strategic documents. Latin America and Caribbean strategic competition with the United States as one of, sorry, in Latin America and Caribbean, strategic competition with the United States as one of the contenders is not a new phenomenon. For about 200 years, since the end of the colonial period in the Americas, there have been geopolitical disputes involving the US and other extra regional powers. China is merely the most recent actor identified by the US as a challenger to its interests in the Western Hemisphere. In 1823, President James Monroe laid the foundations of the so-called Monroe Doctrine, which declared America for the Americans. The US supported the independence movements, recognizing the newly established governments immediately, seeking to replace the influence of European powers, namely Spain, France, the United Kingdom, and Portugal, and to exert leadership over the new American nations to varying degrees. In 1898, this policy led to Spanish-American War. The US defeated Spain and, as a result, gained control of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Guam. The United Kingdom was also a US adversary in the competition for influence in the Americas. During the 1800s and early 1900s, the US used various forms of coercive diplomacy to reduce the influence of the United Kingdom. In 20th century, defending its interests, the US led the creation of the three multilateral arrangements that make up the architecture of so-called hemispheric security: the Inter-American Defense Board, the Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, and the Organization of the American States. With the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the subsequent emergence of the US as the uncontested hegemonic power, US attention to South America and Caribbean diminished. After all, there was no perceived extra-regional competitor threatening US interests in the Western Hemisphere. This trend intensified following 9/11 terrorist attacks, which redirected US attention entirely to so-called war on terror, the Middle East, and Afghanistan. The national security strategy in 2018 reflected the shift in US focus, explicitly naming China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea as adversaries. The 2022 US National Defense Strategy states that the United States derives immense benefit from a stable, peaceful, and democratic Western Hemisphere that reduces threats to homeland. Similarly, the 2022 US National Security Strategy emphasized that no region impacts the United States more directly than the Western Hemisphere. Later in the text, it directly references competition with China in the region. Together, we will support the effective democratic governance, responsive to citizens' needs, defend human rights, and combat gender-based violence, tackle corruption, and protect against interference or coercion, including from the People's Republic of China, Russia, or Iran. The regional importance to the United States is evident not only in documents, but also in the speeches and actions of various officials. In this regard, it is worth analyzing the rhetoric adopted by General Laura Richardson, commander of the U.S. Southern Command, the joint command responsible for Latin America and the Caribbean, excluding Mexico. In testimony before Congress in March 2023, General Richardson made clear her concerns about the actions of extra-regional powers within her command area of responsibility. I quote, "At the end of the Cold War, the United States Its allies and partners believed that democracy would displace authoritarianism around the globe. 25 years later, the strategic environment in Latin America and Caribbean has changed significantly. The 2022 National Security Strategy states in no uncertain terms that autocrats are working overtime to undermine democracy. We see this right here in our own hemisphere, that external malign actors like the People's Republic of China and Russia are aggressively exerting influence over our democratic neighborhoods. End of the quote. China, in turn, began to pay special attention to Latin America and Caribbean only recently in 21st century. This was characterized by the issuance of high-level documents regarding its relationship with the region. China specifically addressed its relationship with Latin America and Caribbean in two white papers issued in 2008 and 2016. The paragraphs in these two documents concerning defense are practically identical, envisioning strengthening policy dialogue and setting up working meeting mechanisms, conducting exchanges of visits between delegations and vessels, deepening professional exchanges in areas such as military training, personal training, and UN peacekeeping, expanding pragmatic cooperation in humanitarian relief, counterterrorism, and other non-traditional security fields, and enhancing cooperation in military trade and military technology. The Chinese government document, China's National Defense in the New Era, issued in 2019, envisions strengthening China's military relationships with Latin American countries, including establishing the China and Latin America High-Level Defense Forum. Ramalho and Cortinha say that China and Brazil defense interactions have led to three important results: an agreement to strengthen the Amazon protection system in telecommunications and information technology, which included the China-Brazil Earth Resources Satellite Program, the creation of a joint Brazil-China Exchange and Cooperation Committee to encourage the exchange of military personnel for training courses and exercises at military academies in both countries, and an attempt to speed up bilateral defense trade, but with few real results. As we can see, the security and defense interactions between China and Brazil are modest. To counterbalance this weakness, China adopts an indirect strategy of rapprochement, leveraging its strategic advantages, particularly those stemming from being Brazil's largest trading partner. One example of Chinese technology adoption by Brazil with significant defense implications and that causes tensions in relations with the US is the adoption of Huawei systems in Brazil's mobile phone infrastructure. Another strategy employed by China to increase its influence in regional processes in the enhancement of so-called soft power, understood here as China's effort to present aspects of its culture as a tool of attraction. As you can see, the competition between the United States and China in all spheres of power has varied degrees of consequences for Brazil. The recent decision at the BRICS meeting to expand its membership with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran exemplifies that type of consequence. The inclusion of Iran in a group that already contained Russia and China gives the group a geopolitical character it did not have at its inception. The US perceives this move as unfavorable to its interests, and Brazil, which is the only BRICS member geographically located in the Western Hemisphere, will need to navigate diplomatically with considerable skill to balance its interests in the face of antagonistic actors. Brazilians understand that they must navigate skillfully as they and other Latin American and Caribbean nations became a stage for the US China rivalry to pursue their own interests. In this regard, they should not lose sight of the fact that while the Western Hemisphere is a region of vital interest to the US, as history itself demonstrates, for the Chinese, the region is not considered an immediate strategic interest. Their presence here seeks to maintain free access to the products they need, open markets for their own products, and establish positions that can serve as bargaining chips with the US in pursuit of their global interests. Finally, it will be up to Brazil to act, not as a follower of either power interests, but always with the focus on prioritizing its own national interests in pursuit of its own objectives. This will require close observation of the international political landscape and a careful analysis of the repercussions of every strategic action taken by the US and China to anticipate their consequences and implications for Brazil, its security, and its defense. Thank you very much. I am at your disposal during the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Paulo. I think it was a very insightful and comprehensive overview of as to how Brazil looks at China's outreach to the global South. We really appreciate this perspective, and this we don't actually get to hear much. So thank you so much for that. With this, let's move to our next speaker, Ms. Ruhi Niog. Is the director of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies in New Delhi. Her research focuses on the role of norms, language, institutions in shaping choices and behavior in international relations, specializing in nuclear strategy and Indian foreign policy. She brings a wealth of expertise as a board member of the International Nuclear Security Forum and a non resident fellow at BASIC. Additionally, she is a fellow with Sandia National Labs, contributing to critical global security issues. And today she'll be sharing with us India's perspective on China's grand strategy towards the global South. Over to you, Ms. Niog, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you. You perhaps need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Can you?
So slowly, there was a sound. Can you say something?
Is this better, Rabia?
Yes, much better. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Rabia, and thank you for the invitation to this webinar. And of course, as I had said earlier, my congratulations to CSSPR and to Observa China on your partnership. So, what I'll try to do is make a few broad observations about foreign policy in general. I think rather than grand strategy, because also as Paulo has outlined, that tends to be far more specific. And of course, what I say here are my own interpretations as an Indian scholar who reads foreign policy behavior. Sorry, did I cut out again?
Yes, yeah, you muted yourself
I'm
for.
so sorry. Could you
Okay.
tell me where did you lose me?
That you are a foreign policy scholar that looks at behavior of states.
Right. Okay, so I'll begin with a couple of observations. And just for clarification, this is happening because I have only 2 bars on my broadband and I'm struggling to stay connected. Um, in terms of the first observation, is that, and I think we all acknowledge this, is for a long time, India and China were able to insulate, their territorial tensions from other aspects of the bilateral relationship, and whether these were political, economic, etc. Now, what this did in the past was that it enabled the relationship to a certain extent to progress even as the border concerns persisted. And this was precisely because of the insulation that I referred to earlier, and also, of course, status quo management, particularly on the border. Now, what has happened is that this modality of engagement has obviously transformed, as you would know, since the clashes in Galwan Valley in 2020. I don't think we see any longer the border dispute functioning within its own separate vertical. In fact, it is very much at the center of the relationship, and I think it certainly dictates how we engage with each other politically and diplomatically. And this really, according to me, is where India and China's approaches diverge with regard to how they interact with each other. In that India wants China to completely militarily disengage from Eastern Ladakh. And the expectation is that on the basis of this, we could attempt a restoration of the relationship to, and the word that is frequently used is normalcy, although that is also very open to interpretation. And on the other hand, I think we see China continuing to insist on what you might call the earlier approach, while also refusing military disengagement from the identified areas. And we see now this come up frequently in statements, etc. And I think the most recent example that we saw this mirrored in was in statements made by India's Minister for External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the SCO summit that was held earlier this year, I think last month. Speaking of the SCO summit, there was also an expectation at the time that Prime Minister Modi of India would attend, right? And that perhaps through this, the two leaders, that is Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping, would meet to discuss this historic low in the relationship and also discuss ways to address and resolve it. And this expectation doesn't come out of a vacuum. It has existed because obviously it is based on an analysis of past patterns, including, they met at the G20 summit in Bali in 2022. They met at the BRICS summit in South Africa in 2023 as well. And this was after the clashes began. But significantly, of course, nothing came out of these meetings. And ultimately, while I don't draw a direct linkage, Prime Minister Modi didn't attend the SCO summit this year. So really, I think what we see is a hardening of position, particularly in terms of political signaling. But what remains to be seen, according to me, is whether this is paying off as strategy for India, and whether this strategy is being subject to other pressures that might dilute the quality of the signaling that India is doing. And of course, we also look then at how China is perceiving these messages or receiving these messages. And I think this really ties back to a fundamental complication in our bilateral engagement, which is the deep economic linkages that exist between India and China. China, for example, is India's largest trading partner, and I think we may find ourselves in a situation where Indian businesses, right, might have interests and stakes in engaging with China that perhaps diverge from what, let's say, a traditional security analyst of the category, Rabia, for example, you and I, Tong, inhabit, might recommend with regard to delinking from China economically and why this is in the interest of India's own security. And if we are to sort of sketch out the security thinking a little bit more, I think a security analyst might be motivated, by an assessment of China's behavior along the line of actual control, China's extensive forays into India's neighborhood, right, both continental and maritime, and in addition to the centrality, as I mentioned earlier, to, of course, the border dispute. And I think in such an assessment, a security analyst would be driven by the logic, that India's ascendant position in international relations or global affairs and China's view of India as part of a broader matrix of power, and this matrix of power also includes the United States, this view could only lead to China tightening its approach to the relationship, right? And I would imagine very likely not letting off pressure on border coercion. in terms of how the security situation might be analyzed here. But what this will do then is that it will create different pressures on policy making that are not aligned with each other, because these actors are interpreting national interest differently, right? And these sorts of pressures, if you find that they are applied by constituencies that have the power to influence policy, will obviously create different limitations for decision making ability as well. Moving on from here, I think one more relevant facet of the relationship that is useful to flag is, and of course this is common knowledge, is that India and China are nuclear armed geographical neighbors, and they are locked in a territorial dispute that has seen a great deal of friction in recent years. So really, these are two countries that are conducting their engagement in the shadow of nuclear weapons, right? But what's interesting about this is, I think a majority of strategic commentators would agree that while our bilateral relations are at a significant low, there is no prospect at this time, at least, of the threat of the use of nuclear weapons being invoked in the political discourse, right? And we've seen this so far with regard to the border clashes. There's been no political posturing around nuclear weapons use, and there are obviously a set of reasons why this happens. But what I think it suggests to us is that there is some expectation of stability within the nuclear domain, even, of course, as we exercise caution about not being complacent about the sense of security that we have, because, for example, both of us have no first use doctrines. All of this being said, I do think that we, India and China, find ourselves in a position, or rather, India actually finds itself in a position where certainly there is a greater reckoning of the threat that China poses to India. But I would also say that we shouldn't assume that just because there is clarity, that automatically means that we have or we can arrive at easy solutions that will, help us break out of the deadlock that the relationship is currently in. My sense would be that it will probably, I would expect to see more of a negative downturn. And I will close here. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabia, Francisco.
Thank you so much, Ruhi, for such an insightful perspective. And you're very right. While we are looking at, the global South perspectives from Brazil, India, Pakistan towards China, uh, the two countries that share border with China obviously look at it a bit differently than Brazil, which is far removed geographically. Even though there might be some parallels with respect to the entity of Global South where we fall in, but there are unique features of these relationships and the dynamics that go with them. So thank you so much for pointing all that out. We will now move to the Pakistan perspective, which will be presented by my colleague, Dr. Asif Amin, who is an assistant professor at the School of Integrated Social Sciences and a research fellow at the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research at University of Lahore. He holds a PhD and a master's degree in international relations from Jilin University, China. Asif's research focuses on terrorism, counterterrorism, and geopolitical issues in South Asia, making him a crucial contributor to today's conversation on China's interactions with the global South from a Pakistani perspective. Over to you, Dr. Asif, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabia. Thank you very much, Francisco, and my counterparts. It's been a fascinating conversation that is ongoing, and very crucial points my counterparts have raised. Uh, just one thing I would like to say that may I turn off my camera because my internet is a bit fluctuating and I don't.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So, thank you very much. So, as we have already talked about China's grand strategy, and Paulo rightfully pointed out the initiatives that China has launched, and China has talked about the vision of President Xi Jinping. So and then Ruhi has already pointed out the anxieties and the great power competition that is brewing in Asia between India and China. So I would be focusing on how Pakistan sees China and what are China's importance in South Asia. So Pakistan-China's relations, the story starts, way back. If you look at Pakistan historically, Pakistan has been, in Western camp since its inception. In 1950s, we were part of CETO and CENTO, which were the Western-led alliances, you may say. And then later on, after 1962, the China-India war that took place, that was a pinnacle and a pivotal point where Pakistan saw an ally, a friend, and a partner who Pakistan could join hands out of the anxieties that Pakistan was facing against India. So there's a term that we use in international relations, enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's what happened here. So Pakistan and China enjoyed an entente cordial after that. And since then, both nations have enjoyed brotherly relations. And those brotherly relations are coined as iron brothers, and a friendship that is taller than the Himalayas and the deeper than the deepest ocean. However, that friendship has turned into a geostrategic and geoeconomic partners. And that happened when Pakistan and China launched China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is the flagship project of Belt and Road Initiative. So this is very crucial and important to understand here. In 2013, when Belt and Road Initiative was launched, which is consists of Silk Road, Maritime Silk Road, and Economic Belt to connect Eurasia and Middle East, and the revival of the ancient roots of trade. This was the concept. So after that, China announced 6 corridors, and China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was chosen as the flagship project. And it started with the $46 billion of investment in Pakistan in different infrastructure projects and energy projects. Here, one thing is very important to understand. It was the time, the height of terrorism in Pakistan. We were having zero foreign direct investment from any country, the Western countries, or even Pakistan was the frontline ally of the United States. But our economy was, in nosedive. Security situation was terrible. So it was China who came up with this investment and who saw a partner and trusted us and invested this in this project, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And that has, revolutionized and has energized Pakistan's economy, has generated jobs. Almost 800 jobs have been created. Lots of infrastructure, energy projects have been launched under China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And now this project is entering into the second phase, where it is looking at the sustainable development, adapting eco-friendly means of infrastructure development, technology sharing, and basically there's a concept of 5 new corridors that should be, created under this project. So this is the background of this partnership that has turned into, a strategic and economic alliance, you may say. However, we cannot call it there's no official alliance between China and Pakistan, but we can call it a threshold alliance between both countries, which is almost an alliance because both Pakistan is the largest, you may say, importer of China's weapons, or you may say the recipient of China's latest weapons. Recently, Pakistan received J-10, and now we are planning to get China's latest technology, the J-31, which is the 5th generation fighter jet. And also China has given Pakistan the latest radars in terms of the defense operation that is ongoing between China and Pakistan. And at the same time, the investment that is coming has almost reached to $72 billion. And it's still ongoing. And there are many projects that are being, being materialized and being, invested in. So what are China's ambitions, and when China looks at South Asia and specifically Pakistan, what China wants and why China is investing heavily in a country which has faced, immense terrorism and, who's domestically, politically, you may say, is unstable, but still China has hopes and still China is investing in it. It's because one of the things that is very important is Pakistan's geostrategic location. Pakistan is at the crossroads of, you may say, the Eurasia and the Middle East, and China, who imports 84% of its oil from the Middle East, and it goes through the Malacca Straits. And there is this anxiety of, if there's any conflict in the future that can, undermine China's all trade through Malacca Straits, Pakistan provides a swift route for China's imports, and China's oil energy anxiety could be resolved through this China-Pakistan economic corridor. That strategic location in terms of China's anxiety that China has because of the Malacca Straits. And then also in terms of China is a growing economy and still growing, and China is looking for new markets. And the Middle East, Eurasia, China-Pakistan economic corridors provides China a quick access to these markets. That's why Pakistan has become a vital partner for China. And China-Pakistan economic corridor has become a crucial link that is linked with China's economy as well. Then security cooperation I have talked about. And one more thing that we have to understand about China's rise, China's peaceful rise, and China's promotion of its soft power and public opinion. Pakistan is, I think, on the top, where public opinion is 80% about it, in a positive way for China, and that matters for China. And at the same time, both countries' friendship is looked upon with interest-based. There are challenges as well, where we can see that as China is rising, it is creating anxiety among the existing great power, the United States. Pakistan is at a crucial point where Pakistan is also heavily dependent on America in terms of, its leverage, its security, and being part of war on terror, and being, a partner with the United States. China is rising, Pakistan is in the middle, and looking upon both giants in terms of, with the confused eyes, you may say, what Pakistan can do here. So how can we look upon this one? There are options for Pakistan, how we can steer through this, great power rivalry. If you look at the options, what we have, either Pakistan can go with the neutrality, Pakistan can go with the balancing, or Pakistan can go with the bandwagoning, or Pakistan can go with hedging. If we look at the neutrality, if Pakistan become a neutral country here, definitely because of its geostrategic location, it won't be in its favor. Similarly, if Pakistan is going for the bandwagoning, Pakistan just being, let become a, a, an ally of the China, the US would look at Pakistan as, a potential threat. And we have seen that right now, the geopolitics of South Asia the dynamics have completely changed. And for the United States, India has become the vital ally. And the US is investing heavily, and there are partnerships that are ongoing with India because of the rise of China. And if we look at the hedging, for hedging, Pakistan needs a strong foreign policy, strong politics and diplomacy. Because of the current economic situation and because of the current political instability in Pakistan, Pakistan doesn't have the leverage to go with the hedging as well. So what can Pakistan do here? How can Pakistan be, at harm's way between this great power rivalry? What can Pakistan do? So I propose that Pakistan can stay neutral, but at the same time, Pakistan have this, option of cooperation between both countries. At one side, Pakistan has a great friend in terms of China. On the other hand, Pakistan has the United States, where Pakistan has its vibrant diaspora and largest export partner as well, and a lots of political and diplomatic leverage in international organizations in terms of when Pakistan is looking for loans, debt from International Monetary Fund, and especially when we talk about the how to say that when it just slipped out of my mind about it's it slipped out of my mind. It was ma'am.
It's okay. You can come back to
No.
it.
When we were facing the sanctions in terms of economic
Nuclear sanctions?
No. The financial, which was linked with the terrorism funding.
All right.
It's all right. It's okay. So the United
FATF?
States.
You're talking about FATF?
Yes. I'm talking about the FATF. Yeah.
Sure.
Financial Action Task Force. So the United States has helped Pakistan in those terms. So these are the things that where Pakistan has very tricky situation, how Pakistan can steer its relations between both countries. So at the same time, Pakistan can stay neutral. Since Pakistan is a middle power, but its middle power status has been waning down because of its economic situation, because of security situation, and because of the unstable political unity within Pakistan. So the middle power status has been waning down. So staying neutral could help Pakistan, but at the same time, Pakistan requires cooperation between both countries, because both countries have stakes in Pakistan in terms of security because of the terrorism that we have faced, and Pakistan is a nuclear equipped country. Imagine if Pakistan falls into...
I will ask you to wrap up, sorry, because you've exceeded your time.
Sure.
Thank you.
So it is important for Pakistan to have a status of neutrality, but at the same time have cooperation between both countries, because we require investment, we require infrastructure development, and we require exports. And Pakistan is an energy-starved country. So these are some of the points that we could work on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asif. There are no easy choices for Pakistan, you're right. But, let's see, given Pakistan's dependency on China, which is both financial, as well as strategic, it doesn't leave much choice for Pakistan. But on the other hand, obviously, its relationship with the US is equally important. So, as very rightly, given your insights on Pakistan's perspective, thank you for that. We will now move to our last panelist, but not the least, Dr. Tong Zhao. He's a senior fellow with the Nuclear Policy Program at Carnegie, China, Carnegie's East Asia-based research center on contemporary China. With a solid background in Washington, Tong's research covers strategic security issues, regional security concerns in the Asia Pacific, and China's security and foreign policy. His deep understanding of China's role in global security makes him a vital voice in this discussion on China's grand strategy. And we have heard three perspectives from the global south, and we've invited Tong to share with us as to how China is looking at the global south. So with this, Tong, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rabia and Francisco. It's a real honor and pleasure to be part of this panel. I'm going to share my preliminary understanding of Chinese thinking about and approach towards global south. And there is an important historical element to it. Since the founding of the People's Republic, China has been really emphasizing the importance of cooperating with developing countries. Mao Zedong has this concept of 3 words, where developing countries constituted the third world that is crucial to early China. Zhou Enlai, he went to the Bandung conference, and under his watch, China worked with other countries, including India, in raising the concept of 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which has become a guiding principle for China's foreign policy in subsequent decades, at least at the declaratory policy level. And this concept of developing countries, global south countries, is gaining new relevance in recent years. And China recognizes this new significance since 2008, the financial crisis. And it's at that time, in 2008, the GDP measured by purchasing power parity of the global south countries exceeded the GDP of the rest of the world. Or to be more precise, exceeded the GDP of developed countries. And from China's perspective, this trend continues to accelerate after that. And this is in contrast with declining Western developed countries' capacity and will to provide public good and to play a key role in international affairs. China has, for example, emphasized the increasing nationalistic approach and deglobalization trends in many developed countries. America First and other concepts highlight these developments. And according to World Bank, the growth rate of developed economies is going to further slow down from 1.5% last year to 1.2% this year, revealing the declining capacity by the developed economies to provide public good and influence international institutions. In contrast, from China's perspective, the developing countries represented by a few leading developing countries, including those under the BRIC title, they are becoming the driving engine of global economic growth, and they are now increasingly willing to share responsibilities in global governance. And this is all consistent with the Chinese leader, Mr. Xi Jinping's understanding of the concept that the West is declining and the East is rising. And for China, the East includes global South countries. Chinese strategists have repeatedly pointed out that a key shared characteristic of global South countries is that they are non-Western countries. So collectively, they are part of this West declining, East rising trend that Xi Jinping has identified. And she has also stressed that we are witnessing a major transformation in global geopolitical landscape that is unseen in more than 100 years. To further adapt to this fundamental international transformation, China has really emphasized the importance of promoting multilateralism and a multipolar world order. And it's in this concept that the importance of global South countries is becoming more and more critical to China. And specifically, China would like to achieve three general goals in highlighting cooperation with global South. First is development. A basic fact is in the last 20 years, the collective GDP of the developed countries as a percentage of world GDP has reduced from about 80% to 40%, whereas the GDP of the new market economies and developing countries has risen from about 20% to almost 60%. So their contribution to international economic growth has become more than 85%. And the global South countries are very emphasizing the importance of focusing on development issues. Development is critical to their national goals. And it's in this area that China has a unique advantage, at least based on China's own perception. China implemented the Belt and Road Initiative to make use of its perceived advantage to increase cooperation with Global South on the issue of development. And the second goal for China to achieve is a different security regime. And this is consistent with China's emphasis on development. For China, development is the foundation for achieving security and both domestic and regional order. And it's on the issue of security that China thinks global South countries has a unique advantage in the sense that they have they constitute the majority of countries in the international system, and they are willing to propose new security approaches that are different from the traditional security approaches dominated by Western countries. And most recently, the positions demonstrated by global South countries over issues like Ukraine war and Israel-Hamas conflict further reinforced this Chinese belief that on regional and global security issues, global South countries are a natural partner for China in questioning and challenging Western security approach and in promoting new security approaches that are more democratic from the Chinese perspective. And the last goal that China seeks to achieve is to influence ideas, norms, and rules at the global level. China thinks that it has a unique approach to concepts like democracy and human rights, where China emphasizes its own whole process, democracy, and the concept of the right to develop as a fundamental element of human rights. China thinks that global South countries would be sympathetic or even appreciative of those concepts of democracy and human rights. And China thinks that its own governance model has good lessons, has positive lessons for other developing countries to consider. More importantly, China is ambitious in promoting new rules and norms and regulations at the international level, working together with global South countries. In economic areas, for example, China thinks global South countries can work with China in, for example, the negotiation of new national quotas within IMF. They can jointly promote de-dollarization and experiment with establishing an alternative payment system to the Western US dollar-dominated system. China can work with Global South in negotiating new agreements on climate change. And equally important, these countries have huge potential to join hands in promoting new regulations regarding cyber, AI, outer space, as well as the governance of biotechnologies. So specifically, we have seen China taking a range of measures to promote these goals. China has emphasized, firstly, bilateral cooperation with key global South countries. Also, China has deepened collaboration with key regional organizations like ASEAN. And also importantly, China is promoting the role of new international mechanisms like BRICS as a leading, as a unique way to deepen to promote the influence of global South countries. For China, BRICS countries represent the most the most powerful developing countries who have great potential to contribute to global governance. And within the BRICS, China thinks the internal division and difference is less compared with within the overall global South bloc. Therefore, it should be easier to first reach general agreement within the leading countries with under BRICS, and then use BRICS to further promote broader cooperation with other members of global South countries. This, of course, is the ideal scenario for China, but in practice, China increasingly recognizes a number of challenges in promoting its cooperation with global South. Firstly, China faces an identity crisis. Many countries increasingly raise questions about whether China belongs to developing countries, given China's overall economic power, technological and military power, etc. Secondly, there is increasingly more intense external competition. Other developed countries, US, Japan, Europe, they have all established different and unique mechanisms to deepen cooperation with global South countries. The Mineral Security Partnership of the United States, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, the Build Back Better initiative, all aim at providing not only different but higher standard alternatives to China's Belt and Road Initiative. So China faces pressure from these advanced competitors. And also there is increasing internal division. India in particular is identified by China as increasingly having divergent views and visions from China. Most recently, the Voice of Global South Summit, organized by India last year, didn't invite China. And China also recognizes that India wants to become a bridge between Global South countries and Western countries. And India doesn't oppose to finding commonality between Global South countries and Western countries. But for China, a key characteristic of Global South is they are non-Western. So this is a huge difference between India and Chinese approaches. And India is actively competing for the leadership role in Global South countries with China, and that is increasingly raising anxiety in Beijing. China also recognizes that other key Global South countries, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, they also have their own economic and political agendas that, in the sense that they don't necessarily fully align with China's geostrategic interests. And the lack of internal agreements on key issues has been a constant challenge. It's hard to say that there is strong internal cohesion within current Global South countries or other regional groupings like G77 or non-aligned movement. In many cases, they have already fallen into severe internal division to the point of becoming less relevant. And lastly, China worries that as deglobalization becomes a trend, as developed countries become less committed to providing public goods, China will increasingly shoulder burdens by helping developing countries overcome their inherent and long-standing internal challenges and to help these countries develop and industrialize. And China is uncertain that it has the sufficient economic resources to play this role, especially when China itself is facing increasing domestic economic challenges. Chinese strategists, to conclude, Chinese strategists are already deliberating about how to overcome these problems. For example, they have raised ideas about potentially stop promoting consensus decision-making within existing groups and coalitions of developing countries. Within BRICS, for example, given India's different approach, maybe consensus is no longer the ideal mechanism for making decisions, and perhaps majority rule should be further promoted. To conclude, China is in the beginning process of coming up with new ideas to tackle these challenges. But it is uncertain that internal consensus will emerge anytime soon. So I see China facing constant challenges, and new uncertainties will emerge that will test China's capacity to fulfill its vision to deepen cooperation with Global South countries. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tong, for such a comprehensive overview of as to how China views the global South. And, with your given your insights, we do see that it is rooted, in a combination of strategic partnerships that you've talked about, shared development goals, and challenge to the status quo, positioning, itself as a leader among developing nations while advancing its own geopolitical and economic interests. So thank you so much for that insightful conversation here. With this, I would like to hand over moderation to Francisco, who is going to lead the Q&A. And I believe that Ruhi, has a question as well. So over to you, Francisco. You wanted to say something and also lead the Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabia. Well, first of all, thank you very much for all the panelists. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Dr. Asif. Thank you, Ruhi. Thank you, Tongjao. Well, this talk that we're having here gives us just like a small spark of how important the topic is, specifically to show, as Mr. Tongjao was mentioning, the lack of not only unity but actually unity inside and outside global South countries. So I was going to talk more about Brazil, but as long as we have like many questions coming up, I'll just keep it short. Actually, one thing that we perceive actually is that at least China, although there might be obviously not a lot of lack of consensus over the topic, over whether it is a developing country, over how it should act towards developing countries or global South. China has a much more long-term view or strategy towards developing countries or global South. Although global South is not a block, like a solid and homogeneous block. But the country, it's not necessarily true. And the case of Brazil, for example, is the most clear case here or example that we can give. Like the last 15 years, we've seen a shift from one side to the other on these issues, which actually make it impossible to establish a long-term joint strategy, especially to put the global South in a more leverages position in the international organization, international negotiations, and etc. Well, I'll stop here. If we have more time later on, we can discuss the case of Brazil joining or not the Belt and Road. Maybe Paulo can help me with that, because that's a long history to talk about. Well, if you allow me, I'm gonna, as we have time, I'm gonna present the questions here in the order they came, considering that we have time. Okay, so I'm gonna share them in the screen as well. The first question is from Eliza Farid. Hello. My question is for Ms. Ruhi. How could the perspective surrounding India being a net security provider in the region shape Beijing's policy towards New Delhi? Ms. Ruhi, the word is yours.
Thank you, Francisco, and thank you, Eliza. I will open by saying perhaps this question is better posed to Tom, since this is about how China views India. But I think the second thing I will say is that this question assumes that China perceives India as a net security provider in the region. I think this is something that could be challenged. And in the event that China thinks that India is a net security provider to neighbors in the region, I don't think, and please Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it is going to bring about any change in the Chinese approach, at least in terms of a change in kind. If at all, it'll be an intensification or a change in degree. But I don't see what else would be necessitated in the event that China believes that this is what India is up to in the region. May I use this opportunity, Francisco, to tack on a question of my own?
Please do, Ms. Ruhi.
So one of the things I've been observing through the course of this discussion is how we are approaching China in the global south or China outside the global south, which is interesting because, Tong, I think perhaps you were driving towards an increasing recognition within Chinese leadership of it being a member of the global south, but on its own terms. So a redefinition of the term global south itself. But I feel like earlier in the conversation and also in the way that this topic has been framed, perhaps there is an assumption or an understanding in other countries, in other global south countries, that China is not a member of the global south. And I think this could be a fundamental thing to clarify as we proceed. So I'll be interested in hearing from the panelists as well. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to jump in here. Thank you, Rihi, for your insights. I agree. And the identity crisis about whether China belongs to developing countries is an external one. It doesn't occur within China because in China there is a strong consensus that China has to make itself a member of developing countries. China has zero interest in identify itself otherwise, because the title of a developing country brings about concrete benefits for China in terms of tariffs, negotiating leverage, privilege in international quota negotiations at international organizations, trade agreement negotiations. So the Chinese paramount leader, Mr. Xi, has repeatedly emphasized, China will forever be a member of the developing countries, and China often points to per capita GDP as a key indicator of its developing country status. But geopolitically, I think China increasingly recognizes that in order to facilitate its long-term competition with US-led Western countries, China needs to work much more closely with global South countries as a new pillar, as a new pole in the multipolar world order. So China has both strong geoeconomic and geopolitical interest in sticking to the identity of being a developing country. And also, if I may, to respond briefly to your previous comment, I agree that Beijing does not necessarily see India as a net security provider. Beijing has growing problems with India working with US-led Western countries through multilateral security cooperation, including QUAD, quadrilateral security cooperation mechanism, and other small group mechanisms. And India's security disagreements with China on its western border works to distract Chinese concentration of military attention and resources to the east, especially South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, where China identifies as its key strategic direction, and where a future potential conflict with US-led Western countries will most likely occur. So in that regard, I think Beijing views India as as undermining China's key security interests. So Beijing, I don't think would agree with India's self-identification.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tong Zhao. Ruhi, is your question answered?
Yes, Francisco, from Tong, of course, but I do feel that between the panelists, there might not be clarity or perhaps even agreement on whether China is a member of the Global South. And I do hear this in other places as well, because finally, the Global South is political terminology, right? As we've all acknowledged, it is really a very amorphous thing. It is not a group. So even to speak of internal disunity, I think for a group that doesn't really exist and is very often invoked for political purposes, perhaps might even be missing the mark. And it'll be interesting to hear, therefore, from others, perhaps even from the participants, on whether they think China is a member of the Global South, is not a member of the Global South, and is engaging with a particular set of countries as, a pole, or as someone just on the limits, or an actor just on the limits. We could say that the Global South is a set of developing countries. We could also say the Global South is made up of countries that were once colonized. So a whole host of definitions exist, right, in this regard. And perhaps this ambiguity, in fact, helps the cause of politically using the terminology of the Global South. But I feel that in some instances, perhaps it works against it, this degree of ambiguity and inconsistency. And ultimately, I think what that leads to is that I don't think we can ever have any expectation of cross-sectional consensus on all issues. It has to be sectoral, it has to be issue-based, and perhaps it has to be within a subset of countries that identify as Global South countries, and will be completely case-by-case based. Thank you.
Would the other panelists would like to comment over it as well? Paulo, Asif?
I can say something, Francisco.
Please, Paulo.
I think I agree with Dr. Hui. It's very hard to find a definition about Global South. If I understood correctly, our Dr. Tong Zhao said that China's understand Global South. The countries who belongs to Global South are not Western countries. Well, we are here in South America. We are in west part of the world. We speak Portuguese. It's a language that came from Europe. And I remember an old professor that says that Brazil is a Western country by choice, by option. I'm not telling that we are from Western part of the globe, because I understand you are talking about the US and its allies in Europe and Asia too. But it's very hard to find a definition that encompasses all these countries in the same block, a cohesive block. Francisco told something about this too. So I agree with Dr. Hui, and it's very hard to find China in this position. Is China inside the Global South or not? It's not clear to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. In order to keep up with the dynamic of the Q&A, I'll continue with the questions. And in case some of you would like to add something over to Ruhi's question, please feel free as well to add while while answering other questions. Okay, because I guess that's a long discussion as well. I don't think we'll find a right question for that. Well, Paulo, just as you're here, there's a question from Syed Ali Zia Jaffrey. I will put it on the screen as well. The economic dimension of China's grand strategy, it's most impactful. How can Brazil use that to increase its economic clout beyond Latin America? That has a lot to do what we were like hinting about the being part or not of the Belt and Road Initiative, all the discussion that surrounds us here, from the academy to our diplomatic body, on whether participating on it or not. So please, I'll handle the word to you.
I think you can help me here, Francisco. But China is Brazil's most important economic partner. You know, I believe the way for Brazil to use this growth is to use this to grow its own economy is to focus investment on productive areas that generate wealth in Brazil and that can be shared with our South American neighbors. Francisco just told that there is a current discussion about the advantage of the country finally joining to Belt and Road Initiative. This succession could foster more infrastructure projects, especially those that increase integration within South America itself. I think just few ideas that occurred to me just now. I don't know if you could add something, Francisco.
I'll try to be short as well. Well, first of all, I agree with you, Paulo, 100% on what it could be done. I agree with you. So just to put it in context, well, I mentioned like once or twice about the Belt and Road Initiative, because as I said before, that's one of the biggest example to show that the Global South is not homogeneous towards its relationship, its respective relationship, bilateral relationship with China. So, and the case of Brazil joining or not the Belt and Road Initiative is a topic that comes and goes and surrounds this idea. Why? So, never until recently, until our vice president's last visit to China, there was a official public statement, and by official I mean by the president, that the country was considering participating on the Belt and Road Initiative. There were always rumors, but the country has always sought, and also actually the country has always tried to maintain itself away from it, or because our diplomatic body, it considered that our relationships to China, especially our economic, in terms of trade and investment, are so big and so developed that first of all, there were not clear reasons to participate on the Belt and Road Initiative. And on the other hand, our relationship with China are so big or so developed to some extent that it would not justify the possible backlashes that we would receive, meaning pressure from traditional allies and etc. And altogether with that, to support this discourse, Brazilian diplomacy has always had some principles, some core principles. And the most important one of those is the independence. So this independence means non-alignment, non-automatic alignment. For traditional partners like the USA or even European countries, joining the Belt and Road Initiative would be like would be considered as an automatic alignment, although it might not be, obviously. So our position was always to maintain distance from the topic. in any case, international system is changed. The situation in our country is also complicated, and now we face a challenge of keeping this traditional position versus the need of the government to advance in some topics that the current government has promised or has promised actually to deliver, especially in the fields of climate change and energy transition, as well as what we call re-industrialization or neo-industrialization. And that's where Belt and Road comes in again. We'll have to wait for the next the development of this, if it was just a spark again, if it was just a loud noise. But in any ways, I think there's something changing in this framework. This would be, just to finalize, I promise, this would be a point of inflection, considering that Brazil and China relations are very much developed in terms of trade and investment, but we are very much dependent on our exports, especially on raw material. So what would be the leverage that we can take from it? Can we only accept the Belt and Road Initiative, or is it possible to accept it with some restraints or with some counterparts on diversifying our exports, receiving investment in certain areas which are considered as priority for now? So again, it's a very long topic, and sorry for extending myself. Dr. Tong Zhao, there are lots of questions here for you. I will continue with them. Okay, I will actually read one of those that was on the line, and it has something to do with the topic we're considering now. What types of challenges China is facing by the Western world to Belt and Road Initiative? Okay.
I think so. Firstly, just to clarify, all my observation here aimed at describing and explaining Chinese thinking and perspectives, and I do not necessarily endorse, such thinking and perspectives. So regarding the question of the challenges that China faces from Western countries to Belt and Road Initiative, the first element of this challenge is related to our previous discussion on whether China belongs to global South countries or developing countries, whether China has a credential to portray itself as a leader in promoting infrastructure cooperation with developing countries, and also in deepening geopolitical cooperation with members of BRI, which is also an important goal of China's BRI. China thinks that it's mostly Western countries who are pioneering this challenge of China's identity as a developing country. So that's a political game that they are playing, and China should just ignore them and continue insisting on being a developing country. And there is a growing internal debate about how to deal with China-India disagreements about who is the rightful leader of global South cooperation. and how to manage China-India relationship regarding their outreach to other global South countries. And China thinks Western countries are increasingly encouraging countries like India to challenge China's leadership position. So that's a second element of challenge China has recognizes from Western countries. But most importantly, China thinks, especially under the Biden administration, the U.S. is really revitalizing its cooperation with other Western countries to jointly provide alternative cooperation projects that would compete with Chinese BRI. The Build Back Better project aims at providing an alternative that sticks to higher standards. China's traditional narrative that the Chinese BRI has this huge advantage in not interfering in internal affairs of member countries. China does not impose its own standards on other countries in their cooperation. Those narratives are increasingly challenged by Western countries' alternative proposals. So inevitably, this concept of geo-economic cooperation and geo-economic partnership will extend into geopolitical arena and entangle increasingly closely with geopolitical rivalry. And China, eventually, I think China faces the question of whether it has the real economic resources and capacity to sustain the increasing cooperation, the increasing competition from Western countries. That depends on China's own healthy and sustainable economic development. So this internal development is another element that China tries to manage well, but is increasingly facing challenges. So these are the main concerns that I have observed from Chinese discussion. I'm happy to defer to other experts. There must be issues that I have ignored in my own limited research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hongzhao. No, actually, your explanation was very, very good. Thank you very much. It was very, very not only helpful but also clarifying. And I understand that you're stating the China's position, and it was very clear. Thank you. We received also a question to Dr. Asif, a very interesting question actually, from Simran Saeed. How can Pakistan strike a balance between China and the US at a time when it is heavily dependent on US influenced financial institution? Also, Asif, if you allow me, there was also a question posed to Dr. Tong Zhao, but that might be a question posed to you actually, if Abdul Waris allows me to. So he said that in Pakistan-China relations, the export-import imbalance can negatively impact the economy and affect the relations. Do you think measures to increase exports from Pakistan can help? I'll put the question here if you want to, just for reference as well.
So, very interesting questions that Simran Saeed asked. And how can Pakistan balance out between the United States and China? The problem here, as I discussed, that Pakistan has a very sensitive situation here. Historically, in security perspective, if you look, Pakistan has, heavily been dependent on the United States. But slowly, when the China-Pakistan economic corridor started and the United States felt that Pakistan has been going into the Eastern Bloc or going into the into the China's bloc, we were unable to get that support, that security and defense equipments that we were getting from the United States. And now Pakistan is getting it mostly from China. But at the same time, here, because Pakistan has been through this war on terror and that has deteriorated the economy, political instability, security situation is very bad, and economy is in shambles. So here, Pakistan has to, take very careful steps not to be in the blocks of these great powers, because as China is rising, there is this great power syndrome and there is this anxiety and paranoia that Graham Allison describes. The United States look at China as a threat, and whoever is in China's camp is a threat to the United States as well. As in one of the questions that talked about India as a net security provider, where is this term coming from? It is coming from the America giving this leverage to India and engaging India to become a net security provider in this region. So for Pakistan here, Pakistan has to remain neutral. As you talked about Brazil being non-aligned, India has had that same strategy since its inception, stayed non-aligned with not in a Soviet bloc or not in the the Western bloc. Right now, Pakistan, as a weak country, has to remain neutral and has to play diplomatic role. His diplomats has to play a very important role in terms of convincing the sides that Pakistan is neutral. It's not in any camps. But at the same time, we require cooperation. We require economic cooperation. We require strategic cooperation as well because we want to grow as well. But at the same time, we are not in anyone's camp. So that's what we can do by remaining neutral and having a cooperation with working with the West and working with the East as well. I hope I answered the question. And Professor Tong Chao, if you would like to add something here, that would be great.
I'm not sure I have much to add about how to address China-Pakistan trade imbalance. But I do see many Chinese experts discussing options to address trade balance between China and other key global South countries like Brazil, which is the topic we just addressed. And I think in general, China recognizes in the bilateral trading relations, further cooperation might exacerbate existing problems. And in the case of Brazil, for instance, the efforts by President Lula to promote reindustrialization might increase the competitive element in a bilateral trade relationship, in the sense that there is some overlap in the types of industrial products that China and Brazil and other developing countries manufacture and provide to the global market. So the solution the Chinese strategists mostly focus on is to identify areas where complementary relations can be further deepened. For example, in agricultural cooperation may be mutually beneficial. China also, identifies for different individual countries areas where China may, provide unique assistance that can be mutually beneficial, including, railroad infrastructure, construction, etc. So pardon my lack of familiarity with China-Pakistan trading relationship, but I think Chinese strategists are, trying to find niche areas where a mutually beneficial trading relationship can be further promoted.
I would like to add to this question as well, and that is about if you look at what we are exporting towards China and what China is giving to us. Pakistan, as mostly an agricultural country and producing mostly agricultural products, has very little things you may say to provide China. At the same time, China, as rising tech giant, by 2025 they want to be self-reliant, 70% self-reliant on in technology, and generating this technology, AI, and many advanced, you know, machinery, mobile phones, and everything that is coming towards, the middle income countries, same as Pakistan. So it's a huge market in Pakistan for such products. Whereas if you look at China, and if we are sending those raw materials, and we have to look at those raw materials, that are those raw materials are being uh, produced within China, and what are the demands, and what we are sending there, what is the quality of those raw materials that we are sending towards China. So that's why there is this imbalance between Pakistan and China, a trade imbalance. And China, as a country of 1.45 billion population, and Pakistan has a 220 million people. So it's a huge, gap because of that as well. How much product we can send that can be consumed there? How much we can produce? So even if we try to, we can't have that, trade in, balance between both countries. Similarly, even if you look at India and China, India is importing almost $100 billion products from China, and it's exporting to China almost 10 to 12 billion dollars. Maybe the figures are different now, right now. So there is that imbalance as well. So it's just because of the sheer size of the economy and sheer size of the country of China that it has this, imbalance. And I don't think it can lead to any sort of conflict or any sort of uh, uh, disbalance between the countries. It's just the placement of and the geography of these countries. That's my understanding about this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both of you. Considering the time uh, and for the final considerations, I will close the Q&A session. In any case, there were lots and lots of interesting questions. Unfortunately, we could not answer all of those. It's an endless conversation, and I think Dr. Rabia will have to make a second round of it. Uh, well, anyways, thank you very much for all the panelists, Mr. Tong Zhao, Mr. Paulo Filho, Dr. Asif, Dr. Ruhi. Thank you so much. And Dr. Rabia, please, the word is yours for final considerations.
Thank you so much, Francisco. I think you're very right. All the questions that have been posed here for our panelists, we have had people asking about China, Afghanistan, and Chinese investment in Afghanistan. What if, Donald Trump comes to power? What happens to, Chinese economy then? And obviously, other corridors that are coming up, like the BRI. And so I think, the question that it's really hard, firstly, to sum up this entire conversation because it was very wide ranging, and it has brought, us to this point of, probably not just like Rui said, try and understand what Global South is. And perhaps that itself requires a separate conversation. while I do understand that perhaps all of us don't need to be on the same page on as to what Global South means, but we do need to have some sort of semblance of, which countries, when they're looking at China, when they're looking at China-US rivalry and get impacted, what are their perspectives of China falling into Global South or not? India taking lead of the Global South. So I think these conversations are extremely important. And I am extremely grateful to our panelists for provoking this kind of thought and conversation, which is not normally, it doesn't normally happen. Normally people just stick to their script and they don't spin the entire conversation, into something else, which could become a pretext for another conversation. So thank you so much, everybody. Paulo, for your perspectives from Brazil, Ruhi, for your perspectives from India, and also provoking our thought, and Dr. Asif, perspectives from Pakistan, and Tong, helping us grasp and get an understanding of, where China sees itself from. And even if there is a contradiction or identity crisis of sorts, that requires a broader conversation and a much deeper one. So thank you so much. With this, Francisco, I think we have managed to launch off our partnership on a very solid ground, already with ideas of what to do next. So thank you so much. I am really happy that we are doing this, and I look forward to many more conversations like this. Thank you.
Likewise, Dr. Rabbit. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the ones who are watching live. Also, thank you for the ones who are going to watch it recorded. And as Dr. Rabia said, the idea here was to make it something broader. But with the topics that we have here, we can think about new other events. So we had topics that come from since SDG to China being a secure of public goods, Belt and Road Initiative, and the difference of rationales from each Global South countries within it. So it's something that we'll leave it for a next one. Thank you, everybody, again. And with that, we'll close our first event and partnership.
Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.